So good morning to the Caron YouTube audience, and good morning to those of you who are in person and those who are trying to watch on live stream or on the closed circuit. I know we're having a couple of technical issues. But welcome to Magic Mountain here on the 22nd of May in 2022 for anybody who's watching in the downstream future. There is a series of topics for the Caron Chapel service, and today's topic is honesty. And I guess in some ways it's self-evident why that might be of issue for the Caron client and Caron family member and for alumni. But I'd like to explore that with you just a little bit. What has become clear to me in my journey of recovery is that the reason why honesty is so fundamental is that it's directly correlated with intimacy. And I don't know that that's quite as obvious. So I'd like to just share a little bit about how that comes clear to me. The person that I think of as I was working on this week and getting ready to share with you was a guy named Robert Keegan, who in the latter part of the 20th century studied human development, and a brilliant thinker, sort of an integral thinker, brought a lot of different sort of people's work together. And when Keegan talks about how human beings grow up, he says that we have two fundamental longings. And one is the longing to be who we are, like and to know ourselves and to have a sense of identity. And the other is to be in relationship with others in a way that is... I don't think I can preach on top of that. Thank you. All right. The longing that I think we have besides individual self-awareness and the ability to individuate is the ability to be in connection. And so when I am in denial, which is one of these fundamental issues for people in addiction recovery, and it's just as much an issue for the family member. I think family members are prone to not want to think that their loved one is as sick, or that we lure ourselves into thinking this time will be different, and then the substance use disorder sufferer is going to say, I swear it'll be different, I won't do it again, and they may very well believe it, and a switch from wine to beer or beer to cocaine or whatever, seems like an intelligent move, and this is going to solve the problem. And what's happening there is a dishonesty with ourselves. We have not made it to looking at ourselves in the mirror. And one of the ways that the movement into recovery is often described by people is as a moment of clarity. And I think that moment of clarity speaks to what I'm talking about, that there's this crack in the lying to ourselves. Another piece of the dishonesty puzzle that fragments this, so that's this fundamental longing that Keegan said we have to know ourselves is limited if we are lying to ourselves about how severe our use disorder or how it's affecting ourselves as members of a family system might be. A second thing, this other longing that we have to be in relationship with somebody else is is where secrets sort of contaminate the pool. And if you know how the Caron community works, there are a number of people in the room who are wearing wristbands, and I often refer to that. If you're wearing the wristband, it identifies you as a Caron client. So that means that you have been diagnosed with a use disorder to some degree to merit admission to the program. And I think if I asked people who were wearing the wristband, have they been dishonest with other people about their use and the implications of their use, I think any honest group would have to say yes, absolutely. Lying just goes with the terrain of being progressed in addiction. It's almost impossible to continue to use and not at least minimize. I remember coming back to the home in my first marriage and having my now deceased ex-wife interrogate me, and I viewed it as interrogation, and I routinely lied or minimized or denied or evaded her very appropriate and fair questions. So The saying in the AA is that secrets keep us sick, and from Keegan's standpoint, secrets keep us from one another. They prevent us from having this bond. But there's a third longing that Keegan doesn't cite, but which I want to add to the stack. And I'm going to call upon Carl Jung. I don't know how many of you know who Carl Jung was, but Carl Jung is a brilliant thinker and one of the two sort of founders of modern-day mental health care. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung were contemporaries and somewhat competitive. Jung was initially a student of Freud, and then they went off. And Jung has tremendous influence on the movement of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Carl Jung wrote an exchange of letters between Bill Wilson and the founder of AA and himself about a client that Carl Jung had who ended up coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and getting sober. And in that, Carl Jung writes, very simply says that the human beings have this fundamental longing for God. I realize that it's my obligation to address an audience that may include people who are comfortably and fundamentally atheist, or who are angrily atheist, or who are comfortably agnostic. And I'm totally fine with that, but I think when I hear Carl Jung talk about this fundamental longing for God, I think that I agree with him in a larger sense, in an interfaith and human sense, that we have a longing for some sort of transcendent fit and belonging, in which we exist in a world that makes sense, and that the ultimate questions that we never will really have satisfactory answers for, we can sort of place in this difficult to define idea that is expressed in the wisdom traditions of the world as God, or as the Tao, or as the other teachings of mystical and theological propositions that come in history around the world. So, three longings: to know ourselves, to know one another, and to know something ultimate. And all of them, I think, get compromised by the person who is suffering from a use disorder, because what happens is this phenomenon of shame. Like, if you were to go with me to my office, which is on the other side of the hill, now a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, I had a friend who had a big oval mirror. It looks like something that came out of a children's fairy tale. It's like a floor-standing mirror. And I have it in my office because every once in a while I will ask a client to stand in front of it and look at themselves. And I've used it in workshops where we've had clients sort of stand and look in the mirror. And it's profound how difficult that can be. Many of the people who are here are not accustomed to having a kind of an eye-to-eye, face-to-face, soul-to-soul with themselves sort of moment. And if we cannot accept ourselves, then it's really easy to not feel comfortable bringing ourselves to other people. And if we cannot really accept ourselves, then the idea of bringing ourselves as we are in front of the divine, however we might understand that, can also cause us to quake in our boots. And a couple more things. One of the things I think is interesting, this theme and these ideas play very centrally in recovery and in the Caron experience, and have for years and years. One of the common therapeutic interventions here is the creation of a papier-mâché mask. So these are masks that look like the kind of things that you see in the Mission Impossible movie, but they're not actually form-fit to the individual's face. They're just papier-mâché, and we provide art supplies and magazines for collage and all that sort of stuff. And our clients do a depiction on the front of the mask of how I see myself as others see me, and then on the inside of the mask, how I see myself as I see myself internally, the internal and external portrait. And one of the things that is fascinating and tragic about the mask exercise is the discrepancy that shows itself in almost every case between the outside and the inside presentation. So if you are a client here with the wristband and I had you do the mask, the likelihood is your inner story is much more grim. And I don't know, it depends on how you see how the world sees you. But some of us think the world sees us in terrible and awful ways. Others of us put up this brave front. And I think the only thing that I think is sort of not right about that paper mache mask for me in terms of where I was in my active addiction is that in order for me to do the exercise properly, I would have had to have 5 fronts. Because I had a variety of presentations. And I remember times in my life when that would really crumble. I'd walk into a room and there would be people from different settings, and I'd be like, uh-oh, I'm usually this way to this person, and I'm usually this way to that person, I'm usually this way to that person, and they're all 3 in the room. What do I do? And I want to spin and run and go find a bottle of Johnny Walker Red, and this duplicity and multiplicity of presentations, this chameleon-like behavior is very characteristic of people who are uncomfortable in their own skin. And one of the things that I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm really grateful to say I haven't had a drink in a very long time. And there are other substances and behaviors that have been a part of that, but I usually just speak about drinking and ask the listener to generalize to whatever is the circumstance or challenge that you're here and is in focus for you. But in all of that times of recovery, it wasn't until almost 10 years into my abstinence that I realized that I would set as a recovery goal for myself what I call life on one page. And for me, that's the notion that one day at a time, I would live in, to the best of my ability, fundamental congruence, where the inside mask and the outside face are identical. So when I'm in my second marriage and when my wife asks me a question, the old Jack used to wonder if I told her the truth, what would she say or do? And then based on my projected, anticipated reaction from her, I might pivot and shift the story, right? And think of that as a white lie or as a protection of her, and not realize that what I was doing was chickening out and compromising the intimacy of our connection. And today, what I've come to realize, and this happens to me not only in my intimate relationship, it happens to me all the time with clients and with colleagues at work. Just last week, I was in an interesting situation with a bunch of us in an interdisciplinary team encounter with a client, and it got really tense. And I knew I had a truth I wanted to speak about how I was feeling, and yet I was afraid to feel it. And I started shaking it, like really, I had this predictive anxiousness about being authentic in certain settings, and I know it must come from my family of origin crap and from other sort of rejections and woundings I've suffered. I'm sure if we had more time, we could connect those dots and draw a big chart and blame a bunch of people in my past. But in any case, it's just the truth. I have a struggle with being authentic in certain circumstances and situations that trigger me. And I can feel it somatically. I feel it in my body. And when that happens, and I know that I have to tell that, and what would slake that would be Johnny Walker Red, or the decision to lie, right? The decision to not speak up. That would calm me down. Instead, what I have learned is that in order to be faithful to my day-to-day recovery commitment, I have to just play the tape out. I have to diplomatically say what is on my heart. And there's a great recovery expression: say what I mean, but don't have to. You can say what you mean, but don't have to say it mean, right? Like that. I don't have to be hostile in my presentation. So in that particular circumstance with this particular client, I think I was intimidated by the people who have bigger, fancier degrees than I do that were at the table, and yet I was differing in my opinion with them in terms of how we saw this particular person. And I also was really watching this person like what I call turtle, just like, and no longer be able to be receptive to the feedback that we're trying to give them, and it made me feel sadness. So I risked authentic sharing, the life on one page moment. I survived. I didn't die. I didn't light up in flame. There was no lightning bolt. I didn't, collapse in a puddle of shame. And in fact, when I got back to my office later, one of the two sort of bigwigs sent me a note saying, by the way, Jack, it was really great that you spoke up. So this is my general experience, is that there's no way, I cannot guarantee you that if you pursue a life of integrity and congruence and life on one pageness and honesty in basically any and all circumstance, that you won't suffer challenge and difficult consequences. I certainly am, and we certainly will. But there is this prize that comes when you are accepted as the person that you risk being. And when you are willing to participate in relationship authentically, and we don't always have to agree on everything. Another notion that comes around in the recovery communities a lot is this thing called the looking good family. I don't know if you've heard of the looking good family, but many of us lived in looking good families. And I remember early in my recovery, one of my siblings, who was at that time still sort of suffering from his own kind of issues, and today sadly is deceased, but he really struggled with the way that I would speak about our family, because he was very, very insistent on pointing out that my parents, who were lovely people, but also very compromised in some of these areas, but that they provided us shelter, and we were the kids who had cars to drive in high school, and we went on trips, and we had all of these creature comforts and food on the table and all of these sorts of things. And what my deep lament is about our family, which I will still say today, is that yes, we looked right on the outside. But today, I know that as a container and as a system, one of the things that we were weak on was authentic intimacy. We did a lot of posturing to one another. And the whole thing of being this looking good family was, there would be like an explosion at night. Somebody would drink too much or do too much of some other substance or whatever, and then there'd be, the unbridled tempers and some huge explosion, and then the next morning, nobody would talk about it. I would come down in the living room, and my dad would go, Jack, do you want a cup of coffee? I'd be like, sure. While there's still shards of a plate, over on the floor, which had been thrown the night before. But no one's going to discuss anything like that. So, the choice here is non-trivial. If Keegan is right, we depend on these things. We depend on being able to be ourselves. And we only grow when we can be ourselves. We depend on being able to be in relationship with others who we can let see us as who we really are. And we can only grow in a context of a sort of supportive environment where we have that, a pocket where at least we can be who we are. And we can move through developmental stages as we have both of those things. Once we understand who we are and who our peeps are, we can then make a move to sort of develop as a human being, in which case we might see ourselves in a new way and seek a new kind of expression of community. But it requires this willingness to put ourselves out there, and that's just in general. But in addiction, if we are people who are, or you're a family member and you have a loved one here who is basically in love with a substance or behavior, which is what that's really like. Addiction is a kind of an infidelity. It's a pseudo marriage to the substance or behavior. It's an attachment that is maladaptive, and the risks are not only that your significant relationships will not flourish and that your intimacy is diminished, but the medical, social, and we're going to have a reading here later this morning from Narcotics Anonymous. I kind of grew up in my recovery in Narcotics Anonymous, and I like a lot of its readings, and one of its classic expressions is that we suffer from a continuing and progressive illness whose ends are always the same: jails, institutions, and death. And so when I talk about the severity of the illness, I don't want to ask anybody who's been in jail to raise their hands, but I guess there are people who have been incarcerated. I got incarcerated several times for drug-related things. Many people would be like, oh, I haven't been institutionalized. I would look at the wristband. And Magic Mountain is a crucial moment where that progression towards loss of life can be interrupted and turned around. And one of its fundamental, sine qua non, the thing without which you don't get real great recovery, is this basic, pivotal element of honesty. And it might terrify you. I was thinking about what it looks like and what my final invitation to us as a community is this morning. I was thinking today in the social environment in which we're in, and as an organization too. Caron has recently developed specific programming for LGBTQ plus IA plus folks. So gender diversity and fluidity are contemporarily focal awarenesses that are being brought to us as clinicians, and what we've recognized for a long time, I think, is that if we don't make it safe for people to tell us about very private and personal aspects of their lives, we can't help them. So the Caron Chapel service used to, years ago, be a place where we would have clients come in and they would stand at the microphone here, and they would, my predecessor, Father Bill Holtberg, used to have a favorite story about a guy named Michael, and his exercise for Michael was to go to small group and then to his community meeting and then to come to chapel, and Michael was supposed to stand up here at the microphone and say, my name is Michael, I'm an addict, I'm gay, I have HIV positive, will you love me as I am and not as I think you expect me to be? And this coming out that Michael was asked to do was transformative for Michael. Michael testified later in his life that changed his whole experience, that being able to sort of present himself as who he understood himself to be in the Caron environment, even to the chapel service, and have at that time the standing ovations, sort of broad, enthusiastic embrace of him as a human being, was the first time he ever felt that kind of love and acceptance. Last thing, and I'll close with this. I have 4-year-old and 9-year-old granddaughters through my second marriage. Charlotte and Lila. Gosh, they're adorable. And I didn't have my own kids. So watching these children in my family today are such an education for me. And they wanted to play hide and seek a couple weeks ago. I see them basically every weekend, which is amazing. And I had to remember hide and seek because I'm an old man and it's a long time since I played hide and seek, you know. And when I heard somebody scream, come out, wherever you are, I was knowing that I was going to talk about honesty. And I thought, yes, that's what I want to invite us to do. Come out of hiding, right? If this is what we are doing, we can't get well. And if this is what we are doing, we can't experience love. And if this is what we do in front of God, we have this notion that God won't accept us as who we are, which I think is fundamentally incorrect in every wisdom tradition I know. So, stakes super high, jails, institutions, and death. Solution, really difficult for some of us to brave authenticity. But even if it makes you shake and quake, please do it, because I don't want to lose you to this maladaptive marriage in which you've been trapped. And I invite us all to come out wherever we are. Thanks, Paul, for coming up.